They told you the dollar was untouchable. They told you gold was a relic of the past. They told you the Middle East tensions would blow over like they always do. But today, on this exact day, every single one of those promises is burning. And I mean that literally. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow channel through which 20% of the world's entire oil supply flows every single day, is on fire. And when Hormuz burns, the dollar does not just shake. The dollar bleeds. But here is what nobody on cable television is telling you. The fire at Hormuz is not the real story. The real story is what is happening simultaneously on the other side of the planet. Because while American news anchors stare at satellite images of tankers changing course, something far more permanent is being locked into place in Beijing, in Moscow, and in Riyadh. Gold has crossed $5,000 per ounce, and the men who saw this coming did not celebrate. They went silent, because they know this number is not a ceiling. It is a starting line. I have spent the last 72 hours going through the data, the shipping records, the central bank filings, the commodity exchange reports, the internal communications from the largest bullion dealers in the country. What I found is not just alarming. It is the clearest signal I have seen in 20 years of watching financial markets that something irreversible has already happened. Not something about to happen, something that has already happened while you were watching the news cycle. So stay with me. I am going to show you the full picture. From the tankers racing through Hormuz, to the central banks that have quietly stopped trusting the United States Treasury, to the mathematical reality that makes $5,000 gold look cheap. And then I am going to give you the only strategy that has worked in every currency collapse in recorded history. Let us start with the fire. The Strait of Hormuz is 17 miles wide at its narrowest point. That is the distance between financial stability and absolute global energy chaos. Every single day, roughly 17 million barrels of crude oil pass through that strait. Roughly 1 out of every 5 barrels consumed anywhere on Earth. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq, and Iran all depend on those 17 miles to get their product to market. Iran has now announced live-fire naval exercises directly inside the strait. Not near it, inside it. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps has deployed fast attack boats and anti-ship missile systems along both coastlines. And for the first time in years, they have specifically named the conditions under which they will begin interdiction operations, stopping ships by force. The response from the tanker fleet has been immediate. Very large crude carriers, the massive vessels that carry 2 million barrels each, have been rerouting around the strait entirely. The detour adds 11 to 14 days to delivery times and costs shipping companies between $400,000 and $800,000 per voyage in additional fuel. Freight rates for the alternative Cape of Good Hope route have already doubled in the last 48 hours. This is not a drill. The market for physical energy delivery is repricing in real time. But here is what most people do not understand about energy shocks and gold. They think this is a temporary problem, a geopolitical flare-up that will calm down once diplomats get involved. They think gold at $5,000 is a panic price that will normalize once the situation stabilizes. That thinking is wrong, because the gold price was already at $5,000 before the first Iranian naval vessel left port. Hormuz is pouring gasoline on a fire that was already burning. They decided to stop. Stop accumulating dollars. Stop buying United States Treasury bonds. Stop treating the American financial system as the neutral, trustworthy infrastructure of global trade, and start buying something else instead. Something that cannot be frozen by executive order. Something that cannot be devalued by a Federal Reserve meeting. And something that has maintained purchasing power for 5,000 years, while every government currency has returned to its intrinsic value of zero. They started buying gold, and they have not stopped. The numbers from the World Gold Council tell a story that should be front-page news everywhere. In 2022 and 2023, central banks collectively purchased more gold than in any year since 1967. 1967, the year before the Bretton Woods system began its terminal collapse. The institutions that manage the monetary reserves of entire nations looked at the current situation, saw the same pattern that preceded the last great dollar crisis, and acted accordingly. China's central bank has not stopped buying for 18 consecutive months. Every month, more tons of physical gold moving from the global market into Chinese vaults. And analysts who track these flows believe the official numbers dramatically understate the actual purchases. There is a shadow buying program operating through state-owned enterprises that does not appear in official reporting. The real accumulation is likely 2 to 3 times what Beijing discloses. Russia has doubled its gold reserves since Western sanctions began, aggressively, not gradually, and in a development that should concern every person holding dollar-denominated savings. Russia and China have both been physically repatriating gold stored in London and New York. They are pulling their metal out of Western custody. That is not the action of countries that trust the current system to survive. That is preparation for a rupture. Now let us talk about why $5,000 is not the top. The math is simple, almost insultingly simple. The BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the dozen nations that have joined since the Kazan summit, is building a trade settlement system that includes a partial gold backing. The details vary by report, but the consistent figure is approximately 40%. 40% of the new reserve asset would need to be backed by physical gold held in member nation vaults. Now run the arithmetic. The combined gross domestic product of BRICS nations exceeds $40 trillion. Global trade within these economies runs into the tens of trillions annually. If the new system requires 40% gold backing, the implied demand is staggering. At current production rates, the world's mines produce roughly 3,000 metric tons of gold per year, total. Every mine, every country, every operation on Earth combined. 3,000 tons. The demand implied by the BRICS Trade Settlement Program would require between 4,000 and 5,000 tons per year. There is a deficit of 1,500 to 2,000 metric tons per year built into the mathematics of this new system. And there is exactly one way to resolve a physical deficit. The price rises until demand is rationed. That means gold does not stop at 5,000. The math does not allow it. Serious analysts are pointing to $10,000 per ounce as the equilibrium price where the new system becomes mathematically viable. And those targets assume an orderly transition. If the transition becomes disorderly, if Hormuz closes, if a major bank fails, there is no model that handles a true run on the global reserve currency. let us talk about what is happening on the ground, because the data from physical metal markets is telling a story that the paper price has not fully absorbed yet. The largest precious metal dealers in the country are reporting delivery delays of 6 to 8 weeks on standard bullion products. In normal market conditions, you walk into a coin dealer, buy a 1-ounce gold coin, and walk out with it. Today you place an order and wait 2 months. That is not a logistics problem. That is a supply problem. The pipeline is empty. Premiums over the spot price, the surcharge you pay to buy an actual coin rather than a paper contract, have exploded. For standard 1-ounce coins, premiums are running 12 to 15% above the published spot price. That means a coin that the ticker says should cost $5,000 is actually selling for $5,600 to $5,700 at the retail level. The physical market has already repriced. The paper market is catching up. And here is the detail nobody is mentioning on financial television. The spread between the paper price traded on commodity exchanges and the actual price being paid for physical metal in private transactions is now the widest since March 2020. In 2020, that spread collapsed within weeks as the Federal Reserve flooded markets with liquidity. This time, there is no mechanism to flood the physical market with gold that does not exist. You cannot print gold. Now I want to talk about Saudi Arabia, because this is where the Hormuz situation and the gold situation converge in a way that is genuinely historic. The petrodollar arrangement, the agreement that has underpinned dollar dominance since 1974, was built on one simple premise. Saudi Arabia would price its oil exclusively in dollars. In exchange, the United States would provide military protection for the Saudi monarchy and security in the Persian Gulf. Every barrel of oil anywhere in the world would require a buyer to first obtain dollars. That guaranteed permanent global demand for the American currency and allowed the Federal Reserve to run deficits at a scale that would have destroyed any other currency. The petrodollar was the invisible tax that the entire world paid to maintain American financial supremacy. That arrangement is fracturing, as Saudi Arabia has been selling oil to China priced in Chinese yuan for over a year. Not exclusively, they still use dollars for most transactions, but the exclusivity is gone. And the moment Saudi Arabia is willing to price oil in non-dollar currencies is a seismic shift. The moment that arrangement fully dissolves, and it is dissolving slowly but measurably, the structural demand for dollars that kept inflation contained and allowed the national debt to balloon to $36 trillion without consequence disappears entirely. The Iranian action at Hormuz is a direct challenge to the military guarantee that underpins the petrodollar. If the United States cannot protect free passage through the strait, the implicit contract between Washington and Riyadh is revealed as hollow. And if that contract is hollow, there is no reason for Saudi Arabia to maintain dollar exclusivity in oil pricing. The two crises, Hormuz and gold, are the same story. Both are expressions of the same reality. The post-1971 global dollar system is reaching the end of its operational life. What does this mean for you? Not abstractly, concretely, right now. It means that every dollar you hold in a savings account, every bond you own, every pension fund allocated to government debt, all of it is an exposure to a currency being systematically abandoned by the most important central banks in the world. The purchasing power of that dollar is not stable. It is declining, not because of inflation in the conventional sense, because the structural demand that supported the dollar's reserve status is eroding, and when that demand is gone, the dollar reverts to the purchasing power of an ordinary fiat currency. And ordinary fiat currencies do not hold their value during periods of fiscal crisis. The United States government currently pays approximately $1 trillion per year in interest on its national debt. $1 trillion. That is more than the entire defense budget, and it is the fastest growing line item in the federal budget because every time debt is rolled over at higher rates, the interest burden grows. The mathematical resolution available to any government in this position throughout history has always been the same. Inflate. Depreciate the currency. Make the debt easier to service by making each dollar worth less. That is the wind at gold's back. Not just Hormuz. Not just BRICS. In the fiscal math of the largest economy on earth, points in exactly one direction. So here is the strategy, the thing that has worked in every historical parallel, in Weimar Germany, in post-war France, in every Latin American currency crisis, in every moment where a reserve currency lost its status. First, you exit paper. Not all at once, not in a panic, but systematically. You reduce your exposure to dollar-denominated assets with no hard backing. Cash in excess of 6 months of living expenses sitting in a bank account is not safety. It is slow confiscation. Move that excess into things that cannot be printed. Second, you understand what you are buying when you buy gold. You are not making a trade. You are not speculating. You are opting out of the fiat system. The converting a promise, the government's promise that your dollar will hold value, into a physical reality that has held value for 5,000 years, independent of any government's promises. That is a fundamentally different mental model than investing in a stock or a bond. Third, you think in ounces, not in dollars. This is critical, and almost nobody talks about it. If you measure the value of your gold in dollars, you will be tempted to sell when the dollar price rises sharply. But you are not trying to accumulate dollars. If dollars were what you wanted, you would keep your dollars. You are trying to accumulate real purchasing power. The strategy is to convert ounces into other real assets when those assets become cheap relative to gold. Land, property, productive businesses, not to convert ounces back into paper. And the moment Hormuz becomes a full blockade, and I am not predicting it will, but the probability is higher than markets are pricing, the sequence that follows is rapid. Oil supply disruption, energy price spike, inflation surge, emergency Federal Reserve response, more liquidity, more dollar printing. Gold moves in a straight vertical line. If Hormuz stabilizes the underlying dynamic, BRICS gold accumulation, petrodollar erosion, fiscal mathematics, continues regardless. The timeline shifts. The destination does not. This is not a prediction about tomorrow's price. This is a recognition of where we are in the cycle. The cycle that began in 1971, when the last hard constraint on dollar creation was removed. Every great currency transition in history follows the same arc. It is slow until it is fast. It is manageable until it is not. And by the time it becomes obvious to everyone, the window to position yourself has closed. The window is still open, but the fire is spreading. We have covered a lot of ground today. From the narrow channel that controls 20% of the world's oil supply, to the central banks quietly stockpiling gold at a pace not seen in half a century, to the mathematical impossibility of backing a new reserve system at current gold prices. None of this is speculation. It is data. It is history. And it is happening right now, while most people are watching the wrong screen. The question was never whether this transition would come. The question has always been whether you would be ready when it did. If this video made you think differently about what is really happening in the global financial system, then do me one favor before you close this tab. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week I go through the data that the mainstream financial media ignores, and I show you exactly what the big money is doing, not what it is saying. The gap between those two things has never been wider, and that gap is where the opportunity lives. Subscribe. Stay sharp. The story is just getting started.